Welcome back to App Stories. Today's episode is brought to you by ZocDoc and Notion. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
Good. We had an interesting conversation about your experiments with the iPad. I think your entire life is an iPad experiments, actually.
That is a good way to put it, actually.
At least over the last, I don't know how many years. It's been at least, 7, 8 years?
No, I think it's actually more than 10.
Oh, I guess it has been. Yeah, it's been
11 or 12 at this point.
I guess that's true.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. That was our pre-show for Club MacStories Premier members and App Stories Plus subscribers. If you're interested in hearing the extended episodes and getting the episode early and ad-free and in high bitrate audio, just go to plus.club or appstories.plus to learn more about Club Premier and our App Stories Plus subscription.
John, before we talk about the share sheet, we have an important announcement.
What is our important announcement?
Well, we're back on Threads.
That is true.
I'm back on Threads. MacStories has been on Threads for a while. You've been on Threads for a while, but I guess now that I'm back, we're all together, and you can find the entire MacStories team on Threads. We had a story on the site with all the links and all the details for the different accounts that you can follow. But I don't know about you, John, but I feel like since I've been back on Threads, I gotta say the engagement there. And I don't mean to sound like a social media manager, but I mean, you gotta take a look at these things if you're running your business and you gotta find your audience.
Right.
There's a lot of people there who are interested in replying and clicking links and, engaging with us.
The vibes are good. The vibes are really good.
The vibes are good.
I've really enjoyed it. And I've actually followed a ton of people over the last couple of days because people I think that the way that Meta is handling hashtags is so much better than Twitter ever did. The fact that they hide the ugly hashtag symbol and that you can only use one in a message so that what you've essentially doing is creating a top level topic as opposed to keyword spamming is really nice. Now, you can't actually follow those hashtags yet. You can save them as a bookmark, I guess, because all it really is right now is a search. It's like a saved search. You could bookmark that particular thing. But I've kind of enjoyed that. People are reintroducing themselves. I've been there, for months now, but I did that as well. And I'm finding a lot of, basically a lot of the groups that I missed on Mastodon, like video game Twitter, and there's like a lot of photographers on there. I've noticed a lot of designers, a lot of people who are adjacent to our world but aren't like in our more narrow sphere, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, I think give it a few weeks, give it a few months maybe, but I have this feeling that Twitter or X or whatever it's called is so done at this point. Like that whole place is done for.
It is. It'll take a very long time for it to die, though. Just in my experience with this kind of stuff, in my past lives. But I think as a cultural phenomenon and as a kind of bellwether for what's happening in the tech world, it's been done for a while and it's not coming back, I don't think.
No. All right. So why are we talking about the share sheet?
Well, because the share sheet is broken as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I think it really needs a makeover. It's one of those things. It's a feature that's been around for a very long time. And it's one that I have to imagine has a lot of technical debt built up inside of it, because it seems as though the first thing that breaks whenever you install the first beta at WWDC is the share sheet. Something's wrong with the share sheet, right? Your friends don't show up properly in the recents, for instance, maybe. It wasn't that long ago that we updated to, I think it was 17.1, and you just disappeared from my phone, which was kind of a hassle because I text you a fair amount. That kind of thing breaks. The share extensions will break. The things won't load. The shortcuts will disappear. Other ones of them just won't work. I mean, there's just a lot going on there. And I think on top of the fact that it breaks on a regular basis is that it's gotten kind of messy. I mean, there's a lot going on in there, especially ever since shortcuts were added as a share extension point, which, I mean, I'm not saying we should get rid of shortcuts in the share extension, because that is a great way to run a shortcut. The problem is that they look exactly like action extensions, and it's really hard sometimes to tell where one group ends and the other one picks up, and it becomes, because everything's monochrome, it's hard to kind of parse what's happening there. So I find myself continually ending up with way too much in that list, and then having to go through and figure out, well, what am I going to jettison? Because I just can't live with this many action extensions and shortcuts in my share sheet. I gotta get rid of some of them, and then it becomes, which ones you're going to throw out, and which ones are going to be, are you going to miss? And I just feel like we need to fix this somehow.
And the difference between action and share extensions is so sort of muddy and confusing at this point. I don't even know what is true anymore, because it used to be, if I recall correctly, so action, the share sheet as we know it, first of all, the share sheet as we know it goes all the way back to iOS 8. iOS 8. We're talking 2014. So next year with iOS 18, it'll be 10 years of this share sheet. All right. And back in the day, gosh, I sound like such an old man back in my day.
We are going to sound like old men here for sure.
Back in the day, it used to be that the difference between the share extensions, the colorful icons at the top, and the action extensions, the monochrome buttons at the bottom, was that the action extensions, when you ran them, for example, in Safari, had access to the DOM of the web page, so to the HTML contents of a web page, whereas share extensions were just for like sharing a URL. And I think, broadly speaking, the difference should be that share extensions are for sharing things, like an image or a link or a document.
Passing data from one place to the other is how I think of it.
And action extensions are for like processing data.
Right.
But like, it's such a fine difference at this point.
Yeah, there's definitely gray area there, and I think that it's not super well enforced in terms of the App Store review. I think developers sometimes, I find apps doing things in ways that I wouldn't have made the draw, but I think on balance, people probably would prefer to have the colorful icon at the top, the big icon, than have the monochrome icon down below. And so I think things get kind of squeezed into share extensions that maybe shouldn't.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by ZocDoc. Have you ever been on the hunt for a new doctor and you ask everyone you know for a recommendation? I mean, it really does make sense. You want a doctor who actually gets you, listens to you, and makes you feel super comfortable. Finally, after weeks of searching, you find the one. They meet all of your requirements and then some. So you call the office and see if they have an appointment available. Then you find out that your perfect doctor doesn't take your insurance. Don't worry. Head on over to ZocDoc to find and book a doctor who's right for you and takes your insurance. ZocDoc is a free app where you can find amazing doctors and book appointments online. We're talking about booking appointments with thousands of top-rated, patient-reviewed doctors and specialists. You can filter specifically for the ones that take your insurance, are located nearby, and treat almost every condition you're searching for. These doctors all have verified reviews from actual real patients, not bots. And the average wait time to see a doctor booked on ZocDoc is between 24 and 48 hours. That's it. You can even get same-day appointments. Once you find the doc you want, you can book them immediately with just a few taps. No more waiting awkwardly on hold with a receptionist. ZocDoc really does make it super easy to find doctors. I've used it to find several for my family when we moved, and with all the different searching and filtering criteria that you can use in the app, you can find exactly what you need without having to scroll endlessly through many pages of websites, which I've also done in the past, and that's no fun at all. So check out ZocDoc. Go to ZocDoc.com/appstories and download the free ZocDoc app today. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/appstories. ZocDoc.com/appstories. Our thanks to ZocDoc for their support of the show.
So first of all, I think We have some suggestions.
I have one more. I have one more problem, Federico, that I want to mention.
What is your problem?
My problem is with the Mac and the fact that
I wanted you to start there. Actually, like the fact that the system is so inconsistent with the Mac, and I think the solution would be to unify the share sheet across platforms.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that I've thought about a lot over the years with my macOS reviews is what's going on with this share sheet? Because it was introduced, it wasn't introduced at the same time as the other share sheet in iOS. And it's never been used by developers as much, and it's never worked the same way that it does on iOS. Now, I think fundamentally, like if you really look at it, if you pull way back and look at it, one of the problems is just the way that iOS and macOS differ from one another, where the Mac has always been about files and moving files around. And iOS was designed originally without a Files app. You weren't supposed to ever see the file system. All you ever did was pass data around. So the share sheet was core and still is core to the way an iOS or an iPadOS device works, because that's how you move data from A to B or act on it. Whereas on a Mac, you've got all kinds of things you can do, and you're in the Finder, you've got all kinds of file type stuff you can do that's been there for decades. And so on the one hand, it's kind of less necessary in that sense, I think, on the Mac. But on the other, it still is a really good way to pass around text, URLs, and all sorts of other things. And it just doesn't work as well, nor is it used as universally. And I think one of the problems that you see on the Mac is particular to web apps, which are so popular these days, is that, one of the problems is if you have a web app, you're probably not going to have a share extension unless you go out of your way to make one, because it's not, you're not building a native app. And so you don't have these native controls that kind of come along for the ride with you. Or you're doing something like working inside the browser and having an extension in Safari or Chrome or whatever. And sure, you can use your extension to act on things inside that browser. But the fact that you don't have a share extension outside of the browser means that you can't, you can't, like, for instance, take a URL from Threads or from Mastodon and do something with it in the same way you could if you had that open in your browser. So to me, there needs to be, the first thing I would do is unify them under a common banner, common technology, to make it easier for developers to roll them out across all of their apps and find ways to encourage their use on the Mac, because I think today they're kind of an afterthought in a lot of respects.
Yeah, the share sheet on the Mac is just so weird and different from what it's like. Like, for example, even if you consider the Shortcuts extension, how it works on the Mac and how it works on the iPhone and iPad. On the Mac, it's basically what it used to be years ago with Workflow. There's a Shortcuts button. You press it, and it brings up a list of all your shortcuts that you've enabled for the a huge list of all the shortcuts you've enabled for the share sheet. And that's what it used to be like with Workflow, and I believe the original shortcuts maybe back in the day. And it's totally different from iOS and iPadOS.
Well, the thing about shortcuts, Federico, is it kind of shows that not even Apple cares as much about the share sheet, I don't think, because when shortcuts came to the Mac, it came with all kinds of ways to use shortcuts on the Mac, but it didn't have a share extension the first year. That was a second year thing. And so I feel like it's even an afterthought for Apple with some of its own apps.
Yeah. All right. So I already mentioned this, and I'll mention it again as a suggestion. I think the difference between share and action extensions, it's just too blurry at this point, and it's never enforced consistently by developers. And it's like, I think that difference is only there at this point because of like the visual separation between different types of actions more than their practical purpose. I guess it made sense back in the day. The share sheet was, if you think about it, it was only 2 years after Twitter, after Apple rolled out their Twitter integration. Remember, there used to be a Twitter integration.
Right, there used to be a Facebook one too. Remember, it was like there was just a handful of dedicated apps that could use, that were essentially what what was the share extension.
And that was like a precursor to the share sheet. You had these special like share sheets for sharing links and images to your Facebook wall. Oh my God, that's so 10 years ago. Or to your Twitter timeline. And like that, it was all sort of evolving from there with iOS 8.
Right. And there was no way that was ever going to scale, cutting deals with one-off companies like Facebook and Twitter.
But like that idea of like, so when you want to share something, you tap on an icon. And when you want to process something, you tap on a button. Like that feels like a visual distinction that was conceived a decade ago, and which it was, and it's been sticking around so far. And I just feel like right now there's maybe better ways to imagine a share UI that goes beyond a sheet with a row of icons and a list of buttons. And I mean, I'm going to say something. Put the AirDrop team in charge of reimagining the share sheet, because clearly those folks, they know how to design a novel UI that is fun and practical at the same time. Which I believe is the same people who designed the dynamic island, by the way.
Interesting.
Great people. Yeah. I mean, it's that kind of modernization, I guess, is what I'm asking for.
Yeah, no, that would be great.
You had this cool idea that I didn't think about, and as soon as I saw it in your notes, it made complete sense to me.
Yeah.
App shortcuts as extensions. Please elaborate.
All right. So this is where the entire topic for this episode came from. I was thinking about app shortcuts and the way you can expose them through Spotlight search just by pulling down and typing what you want to do. And I thought, boy, that's an awful lot like an action extension. Why not have a more contextual system that is built on app shortcuts that let you do all those actions on whatever is on your screen at a particular time, instead of having to scroll through a list and find it? Just let me type a few characters and figure out what it is I'm trying to do and use app shortcuts, because app shortcuts, that takes the burden and it puts it on the developers, but developers are already doing this now, creating these app shortcuts to have them available in the Shortcuts app and in Spotlight and things like that. I think it's a really short step to just go a little bit further and surface those in a way that takes some of the load off the share sheet.
Yeah, I feel like when I saw it in your notes, it was like it immediately clicked as an idea. Like, yeah, I mean, these app shortcuts. So you have this system where, think about it this way, I guess. You have an app that can provide multiple entry points.
Yep.
It's like, imagine if an app supported multiple extensions, and you already have this system where the app shortcut can be something that just runs on its own, or accepts input, right? Because, I mean, we know shortcuts. We know how actions work. They support input. And so I wouldn't be surprised if... So, what you just mentioned, when you search for an app in Spotlight, and you get the icon of the app, and right next to it, the smaller icons for the app shortcuts. Imagine if a future version of the share sheet was a little more like that. When, like, you share something, you get the icon of the app, and maybe you long press it, or maybe, I don't know, there's some kind of different design, and you have these multiple shortcuts. This can be, for example, if you want to share to a social profile, like there could be an Instagram icon, and right next to it, the app shortcuts for posting to your profile or posting to your work profile or something like that.
Right.
Like this idea of there's a one host app and multiple extensions or app shortcuts associated with it. I think that's very likely a direction that Apple could go down.
Yeah, and you could have, controls in there too, because for instance, if you start typing dark mode into Spotlight search, you'll get a toggle switch that lets you turn dark mode on and off. That's coming from the settings app. You could have that sort of control coming from other apps as well, I think, or maybe a play button for music apps.
Yeah. So I really do think that we could see something along these lines.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Notion. Notion combines your notes, docs, and projects all together in one beautiful space. And navigating that space is easier than ever thanks to Notion's new feature, Q&A. Q&A is an AI assistant that can answer questions about next quarter's roadmap, find that marketing campaign proposal you're looking for, or dig up a long-lost link, all in seconds. ZocDoc is one of those tools that really helps you get organized because it lets you create a web of documents that makes sense with the way you work and the way your business is run. It's super easy that way. And not only can you gather all that information and store it in one unified place, but you can view it in a whole bunch of different ways. You can view it as a calendar or a table or a database or an outline. There's a whole bunch of different ways to view your information in Notion, which makes it really easy to parse what you've got, whether you've just got a handful of notes or you've got an enormous amount of data about customers or something like that. And Notion AI can give you the instant answers to all of your questions using information from across your wiki projects, docs, and meeting notes. You can also ask Q&A questions from anywhere inside Notion, so you can find exactly what you need without leaving the doc that you're currently in right now and stay focused on what's most important. When you use Notion AI, it's even easier to do your most meaningful work. Plus, you can trust that the data is secure because Notion AI is designed to protect your information. No AI models are trained on your information. The data is encrypted, and answers will never use information from pages that you don't have access to. Try Notion AI for free when you go to notion.com/appstories. That's all lowercase letters, notion.com/appstories to try the powerful, easy-to-use Notion AI today. And when you use our link, you'll be supporting our show. That's notion.com/appstories. Our thanks to Notion for their support of the show.
The other idea about shortcuts that I wanted to mention, so I have this sort of similar to something you had in your notes. My pitch is for more direct connections and fewer share sheets. Mm-hmm. So I think it's wild that in 2023, almost 24, we have both on macOS and iPadOS, right? For the past couple of years, we have a native system for customizable toolbars. And in those toolbars, we cannot pin whatever extension or custom shortcut we want. Mm-hmm. I think it's wild. And this is not possible on the Mac either.
No, it's not. I mean, the closest thing you have are like the quick actions, but those are like buried in a right click menu. They're not a contextual menu. You don't have them in the actual toolbars.
So I feel like a source of inspiration for this was when I was using the Lear RSS client, which is the one I've been using for the past few months. Lear lets you configure good links as a read later service. And in the settings, you can say, I want my toolbar shortcut to be the good links one. And so Lear lets you manually change the read later button that appears in the bottom toolbar when you're reading an article. Great. When you tap on the good links button that appears, somehow the Lear developer figured out a way to bring up the good links extension directly without going through the share sheet first.
Interesting, because the Reader is doing something very similar on the Mac.
Yeah. So Lear on the iPad, you press it, and the iPhone is the same. You tap the good links button, and it brings up the good links share UI. And that's the share extension that you typically get from the share sheet. Here, you're getting it by clicking a button in a toolbar. Right. And that is exactly the kind of interface that I want to have in the future, but not done by the Lear developer, done system-wide, made available by Apple as an API for developers. And also not just extensions, but like, let me take one of my shortcuts and put it right there in the Safari toolbar or the Apple Notes toolbar. Like, let me skip this step of going through the share sheet first and let me put my favorite shared destinations as pinned UI elements across the system.
Once again, RSS readers are at the forefront of innovation because,
Who would
really,
have thought?
Right? Well, think about it. Back in the day, it was RSS readers that were essentially doing their own share sheets. They were doing custom share sheets.
One could even say, John, that RSS clients are a playground UI design playground.
Yes, one could say that. Yeah, it's yes. The RSS is dead. Long live RSS. It's everywhere and nowhere all at once. But yeah, Reader does something very similar on the Mac where it's accessing everything that you can have in the share extension button on the Mac, but it's turning them into buttons in the toolbar in Reader, and you can do it for good links. You can do it for basically anything that's there. You can even have a shortcuts button in the Reader toolbar. And so, and that's something that I do because I do like having that stuff available in the toolbar and not having to like scroll through a list. So yeah, it's a great suggestion.
All right. What else would you like? Do you have anything else, John? I have a couple of things.
Let's see. I don't know. Why don't you go with another one? Let me look at my list.
So I had this idea, and I don't fully believe in myself, but I had this idea of like, hey, maybe a way to modernize the share sheet. If Apple is sticking with, I mean, let's face it, there needs to be a share UI. I'm not arguing against, let's drop the share sheet and go all in with letting people run shortcuts and things. No, I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm asking for a modernization of the share UI. And maybe part of that modernization could be, let me customize the order of extensions in the share UI in a more intelligent way. And I thought of two ways to do this.
Mm-hmm.
One could be an automatic sort of sorting based on like the system kind of understanding what you typically do in the share sheet. Like, for example, on a week-to-week basis, I write my articles in Obsidian and I hit share and I share them with the working copy extension.
Right.
Maybe over time, the iOS and iPadOS could intelligently prioritize certain extensions over others, even though you set a different order for those extensions by learning from your habits.
We can call it Siri suggestions, Federico. I mean,
them Siri suggestions. Then you can. We know Apple; they love to reuse their feature and product names, and this one is right there. But also, we could do things like modify the share sheet on an app by app basis.
Mm-hmm.
This could be more of a user like manual thing. But I could do something like when I'm using Obsidian, I want the share sheet to have these and these extensions. When I'm using Safari, I want to have this. Right now, the share sheet is more of a global setting, and I think it will be useful, especially for the power user side of things, to have a more app-specific model. And lastly, this is sort of related to sharing, not about the share sheet, but it's about the similar idea of like sharing information on our devices. Why does the quick actions feature of the Files app, so iOS and iPadOS, still not support custom shortcuts like Finder does on macOS?
Right.
It's the same feature.
It is.
Comes with the same defaults, only the Mac version lets you run shortcuts from Finder.
It's one of the many imponderables about shortcuts. I mean, why are there no personal automations on the Mac? I mean, you could say you could go back and forth with a bunch of different things like that, but I agree with you. It should be available in the Files app.
Yeah. So that's my list. At the end of the day, I think there is still gonna be a share UI, and I think the most likely solutions I think it's very likely that we're going to get some Siri suggestions in the share sheet, that Apple is going to embrace app shortcuts as the new way to build extensions. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this happens next year. App shortcuts have been pretty well received, I would say.
I think so.
So I think that's very likely. And then just the ability for power users and I wouldn't mind if this was like an iPad only or iPad and Mac only maybe feature. Let me pin extensions or shortcuts to app toolbars, which are already customizable. So You just just gotta go the extra mile and enable support for extensions.
Yeah. So I think what you don't want to end up with is a menu button, a 3-dot menu button that just takes the place of the share sheet as the place where everything has been stuffed and is really uncontrollable and hard to find things. Because I could see it going that way too. But I think this topic, what's interesting to me about this topic is that we've seen so much convergence between macOS, iPadOS, and iOS over time in terms of design and functionality. This is one place where it just really hasn't come together. And I think that we'd be better off with something that looks a little bit more like iOS and iPadOS, since the Mac share system is so broken, really, that I would like to see some of that stuff we have already on the iPad and the iPhone come over to the Mac. But I think the time is now to rethink it from the ground up, because even though the Mac is in pretty bad shape on this front, and I think iOS could, has some good ideas that could be implemented on the Mac, I think there are enough problems on the iOS side as well that it really is time to kind of rethink the whole thing. And I don't know. I'm hopeful for this coming year for that. All right, Federico, that was a good conversation. Thanks everybody for listening today, and thanks to our two sponsors, ZocDoc and Notion. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. We're on Mastodon. Just go to Viticci.MacStories.net and JohnVorhees.MacStories.net to follow us from there.
And we're also on Threads.
We are.
I can say
Threads
that.
And Instagram. And MacStories is on Threads too. We should mention that again because it's MacStories.net. And of course, Federico and I are both on there, where Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.